Connor arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital just after sunrise, the pale Boston light cutting through the cold morning air as he stepped out of the rideshare. His head throbbed from the previous night, too many drinks, too little sleep, and the stale taste of whiskey clung stubbornly to his breath. In his hand was a bouquet of white roses, bought at the corner shop across from the hospital. He hadn't chosen them with care. He hadn't even looked at the options. He'd simply grabbed the first thing the clerk wrapped, knowing that walking into the ICU without flowers would raise questions he didn't want to answer. He pushed through the hospital's glass doors, squinting at the brightness of the lobby. People moved in calm, purposeful rhythms. Doctors, nurses, families with coffee cups and tired faces. Connor kept his head down. The elevator dinged nearby, an open door inviting him in, but he veered sharply toward the stairwell instead. The last thing he wanted was to be trapped in a metal box with strangers who might smile, nod, or worse, ask how his wife was doing. He preferred the quiet, the anonymity, the climb. Each step up to the fourth-floor ICU landing felt heavier than the last. His legs weren't tired. His patience was. A month. Lydia had been unconscious for a full month, and every single day of it was costing him money. Mountains of it. ICU rates, neuromonitoring, specialist consultations, sedation, equipment rentals. Dr. Lawson had explained it all carefully on day one, his calm voice describing the costs associated with prolonged coma care. At the time, Connor had nodded solemnly, pretending to absorb the responsibility of a devoted husband. Now, the only thing he absorbed was resentment. Tens of thousands each week, gone, burned. For what? Lydia showed no real improvement, no flicker of awareness, no conversation about recovery, no guarantee she would ever wake up. And so, as he climbed, his thoughts turned darker, more practical, more honest. If she didn't make it, everything would finally be his. Her Cambridge townhouse, worth 7 figures. Her company, solid, profitable, already respected in the construction sector. Her investments, her savings, her entire carefully built life, all of it would fall neatly into his hands. He rested briefly on the landing, inhaling sharply as he forced his expression into something appropriately drained and sorrowful. He practiced the look often now, the furrowed brow, the down-turned gaze, the quiet anguish people expected from a grieving spouse. It wasn't difficult, it was simply acting, and he'd become good at it. By the time he pushed open the ICU hallway door, he carried the roses gently, almost tenderly, as if the gesture came from the heart. His face held the practiced mask of a man suffering quietly, a man burdened with love and fear, a man who, beneath all that performance, wished the beeping machines in Lydia Carter's room would finally go silent. Dr. Benjamin Lawson stood at the foot of Lydia's bed, his voice calm and steady as he spoke to Helen and Walter Carter. Morning sunlight filtered through the narrow ICU window, casting muted reflections across the monitors. "Her vitals remain stable," he said, hands lightly clasped in front of him. "And we're seeing a few encouraging responses in her neurological readings. They're small, but positive." Helen pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, nodding rapidly as if afraid hope might slip away if she didn't hold on to it tightly enough. "Does that mean she might come back to us?" Her voice cracked under the weight of the question. Walter, usually stoic, leaned forward in his chair, eyes searching the doctor's face. "Is there a chance she'll wake up?" Dr. Lawson softened his tone. "There is a chance, yes. With prolonged coma cases, especially in younger patients like Lydia, the brain can respond to familiar voices. I recommend talking to her every day. Tell her stories. Remind her of moments she loves. Even if she doesn't react visibly, auditory stimulation can be incredibly helpful." Helen exhaled shakily, gripping Walter's arm. "We'll talk to her every hour if we need to. Anything she needs." Just outside the partially closed door, Connor stood listening, jaw tightening with each hopeful word. Small positive signs, he muttered under his breath. Of course. Helen and Walter would cling to anything, but to him, every positive sign meant another round of ICU costs, another week of bills that drained accounts he believed should already be his. False hope was expensive, and Lydia's parents seemed determined to buy it in bulk. He rolled his eyes toward the ceiling, exasperated by the doctor's optimism and the parents' naive gratitude. Lydia wasn't improving. He knew it. Everyone else was simply too sentimental to admit it. Footsteps echoed in the hallway and Connor straightened instantly, smoothing his expression into the familiar mask of weary devotion. He lifted the bouquet slightly, tilted his head just enough to appear thoughtfully concerned, and pushed the door open. "Morning," he murmured, voice wrapped in manufactured exhaustion. Helen offered him a grateful smile, mistaking his performance for loyalty. Walter nodded at him with steady respect, but behind Connor's polite nods and soft sighs, fury churned. Stable was not what he wanted to hear. Decline would have meant closure, inheritance freedom. Instead, Lydia continued to hold on, and every moment she did cost him more than he was willing to pay. Connor's gaze drifted toward Lydia's still form, but his mind slipped backward, years before ICU rooms, monitors, and carefully rehearsed expressions of grief. Back to the day everything began. It had been at a construction and urban development summit in downtown Boston, one of those polished events where big firms showcase their newest projects and smaller companies hope to catch the right attention. Connor was a mid-level project coordinator back then, competent, ambitious, and painfully aware of how invisible he felt compared to the executives who dominated the room. And then Lydia stepped onto the stage. He remembered how the crowd shifted, how the low hum of conversation died down almost instantly. Lydia Carter, already known for turning her small inherited contracting firm into a rising Boston powerhouse, carried herself with a calm confidence that made even seasoned CEOs straighten in their seats. She spoke with clarity, outlining sustainable building models and modern zoning strategies as if she were sketching the future with her words alone. No hesitation, no nerves, just presence, authority. Connor had watched her, feeling a flicker of something unfamiliar, part awe, part intimidation. He wasn't used to seeing someone his age command a room that effortlessly. When she finished and the audience applauded, he clapped too, harder than he expected, drawn to her like gravity itself had shifted. When he gathered the courage to approach her after the panel, he anticipated a curt, distracted response, the way successful people brushed off strangers. But Lydia greeted him with a warm, uncomplicated smile. She asked about his work, listened thoughtfully, and didn't seem to care that he came from a modest company with a modest title. That moment hooked him. Within months they were dating. Within a year they were married. Lydia lifted him into a world he hadn't known how to access on his own. She encouraged him to take additional certifications, introduced him to people who mattered, and eased him into circles that once felt out of reach. When she suggested they move into a Cambridge townhouse, hers, of course, he felt as if he'd stepped through a door he had no business walking through. She didn't flaunt her success, she simply shared it, expecting nothing in return. At first, Connor believed he loved her, or at least he loved what she made him feel. Relevant, impressive, important. But admiration curdled quickly. As her company kept growing, as her name appeared in industry magazines, as people congratulated her while politely acknowledging him, the imbalance gnawed at him. He began to resent the very qualities that had once drawn him in, her leadership, her discipline, the respect she commanded simply by entering a room. He felt overshadowed, a supporting character in a story that revolved around Lydia's accomplishments, and every time she declined to give him formal control over parts of her company, explaining that business and marriage should stay separate, his resentment deepened. What had begun as gratitude twisted into envy, then entitlement. He started convincing himself that he deserved the life she built, The townhouse, the company, the assets, all of it. After all, he was her husband. Why shouldn't those things belong to him? Affection faded, replaced by ambition sharpened into something darker. And as Lydia climbed higher, Connor's frustration burned hotter. Until the day came when he no longer saw her success as something shared. He saw it as something owed. Phoebe Lawson had been part of Massachusetts General Hospital far longer than any child should. At 10 years old, she moved through its hallways with the kind of quiet familiarity usually reserved for staff. Nurses greeted her by name, volunteers offered her extra stickers, and orderlies always slowed their carts when she wandered past. After several surgeries and months of recovery, the pediatric wing had become her world, a place where she felt safe, watched over, and gently understood. She was allowed to roam within certain areas, mostly the pediatric lounge, the family waiting rooms, and the long hallway that overlooked the Charles River. But Phoebe had a gift for slipping unnoticed into quieter corners of the hospital. She never caused trouble. She simply drifted, curious and soft-footed, searching for places where silence felt kind. That was how she found Lydia Carter. The first time Phoebe peeked into Lydia's ICU room, she froze at the sight of the pale, still woman, surrounded by monitors and soft, beeping tones. To Phoebe, who had read countless fairy tales during her hospital stays, Lydia looked like a sleeping princess, someone trapped between worlds, waiting for a helper, a guardian, a friend, and in her young mind, that role belonged to her. She approached the bedside with the solemnity of a child performing an important duty. "You're not alone," she whispered, gripping the doorframe. The words tumbled out unplanned, but they felt right. From that day on, she returned whenever she could. Sometimes she curled up beneath the bed, small enough to disappear into the shadows. Other times, she tucked herself inside the half-open closet, knees to her chest, listening to the steady hum of machines. She always brought her plush teddy bear, soft, worn, and fitted with a small voice recorder. Dr. Benjamin Lawson had given it to her months earlier, after one particularly difficult procedure left her trembling and unable to speak. "When you're scared," he told her gently, "tell the bear. He listens, and when you're ready, he can repeat your words back to you." It was his way of giving her a voice when her own felt too fragile. Phoebe took that responsibility seriously. She whispered stories to Lydia about the nurses she liked, the movies she watched, the dreams she had. She described the weather outside, the flowers in the volunteer garden, and the rumor that a therapy dog might visit the pediatric wing soon. She told Lydia she was brave, even in her sleep. She promised to protect her. Over time, Lydia, though unresponsive, became the emotional anchor Phoebe had long been missing. The woman in the bed couldn't answer, couldn't move, couldn't assure her of anything. But Phoebe believed Lydia could hear her. She believed her voice mattered. And in a hospital full of uncertainty, that belief gave her courage. The hallway outside Lydia's room was unusually quiet, the mid-afternoon lull settling over the ICU like a held breath. No nurses hovered nearby, no carts rolled past, no soft conversations drifted through the air. It was exactly the kind of moment Connor had been waiting for. He glanced once over his shoulder, then pushed open Lydia's door with the confidence of someone who knew he wouldn't be interrupted. He didn't bother bringing flowers this time. The door clicked shut behind him, and his façade slipped the moment he was alone. The tender, grieving husband expression evaporated, replaced by raw irritation twisting across his face. He stepped closer to the bed, staring down at Lydia's still, pale form, and scoffed under his breath. "You're a damn burden," he hissed. "A month of this, a month, and you just lie here, doing nothing." His voice grew sharper, filled with resentment that had fermented too long. "You couldn't make this easy, could you? Couldn't just let go?" Unseen beneath the bed, Phoebe's eyes went wide. She had slipped in earlier, determined to keep Lydia company during her quiet hour. The moment Connor entered, she froze, clutching her teddy bear so tightly she could feel the recorder inside press against her palm. Every word he spat felt like a stone dropping into her chest. She had heard anger before, patients in pain, parents overwhelmed, but never something like this, never a grown man wishing someone would die. Connor moved to the side of the bed, fingers brushing the edge of the ventilator panel. The machine blinked with soft green lights, its rhythmic hiss filling the room. He hovered his hand over a cluster of buttons. One press, one adjustment, one interruption in airflow could mean disaster. This could all be over, he muttered, voice low and trembling with the frustration he worked so hard to hide from everyone else. 1 month of bills, 1 month of pretending, 1 month of your parents' pathetic hope. His jaw tightened, and he leaned closer to the machine. You're dragging my entire life down. Phoebe held her breath, too terrified to move, her small fingers digging into the bear's fur. Her heart pounded so loudly she worried he might hear it thudding against the mattress frame. Connor's hand twitched. Then, after a tense breath, he pulled back sharply. Not today, he growled, slamming his palm against the metal rail of the bed. Someone's always around. I need the right moment. He stormed out of the room, the door swinging shut behind him with a hollow thud. For a second, Phoebe didn't move. Then panic surged through her. She scrambled out from beneath the bed, almost tripping in her haste, and bolted into the hallway. She ran past startled nurses, down the corridor she knew by heart, until she reached the nurses' station where Dr. Bao Lawson stood reviewing charts. She yanked on his sleeve, breathless, eyes shining with fear. Dr. Lawson, he wants to hurt her, she gasped. Lydia's in danger. You have to stop him. And for the first time since he'd known her, Benjamin Lawson saw true terror in her young eyes. Dr. Lawson guided Phoebe into a quieter alcove beside the nurse's station, crouching so his eyes aligned with hers. She was shaking, clutching her teddy bear to her chest like a shield. Her words spilled out in frightened fragments, Connor yelling, calling Lydia a burden, his hand hovering over the ventilator controls. Benjamin listened to every detail, his expression calm but intent. He didn't dismiss her. He never dismissed Phoebe. But he also knew that frightened children could misinterpret things, blend fear with imagination, or repeat something they didn't fully understand. Still, something in her voice, its urgency, its trembling sincerity, made him pay attention. You did the right thing coming to me, he said gently. Thank you for telling me. Phoebe's chin wobbled. He wanted her to stop breathing, she whispered. I know he did. I felt it. Benjamin placed a steady hand on her shoulder. I'll check on Lydia right now, and I promise, I won't let anything happen to her. The vow was quiet but firm. He rose and walked quickly down the hall, Phoebe trailing behind him until a nurse gently guided her to the family waiting area. When he entered Lydia's room, Benjamin paused, scanning the space with a clinician's practiced eye. Nothing appeared disturbed, but the tension Phoebe described lingered like an invisible residue. He moved to the bedside, his focus shifting to the monitors. Heart rate, slightly elevated. Oxygen saturation, steady but subtly more reactive. The neurological activity panel displayed faint but measurable fluctuations, tiny deviations from her previous flat patterns. To anyone else, they would look like meaningless data. But to Benjamin, who had been studying Lydia's vitals for a month, they meant something. Interesting, he murmured. He touched her hand lightly. Lydia, if you can hear me, you're safe. The numbers shifted again, small but real. Was it mere coincidence? Or had Phoebe's constant whispering, her stories, her emotional presence, been stimulating something deeper than they realized? He exhaled slowly, feeling the first true seed of hope since Lydia collapsed. But another feeling crept in alongside it, suspicion. Connor had always been curt. Impatient, too focused on finances and timelines. His agitation during updates, the tension in his jaw, the way he lingered outside the room with restless energy. Benjamin had noticed all of it. He had brushed it off as stress, but now, with Phoebe's account echoing in his mind, those behaviors aligned into a more troubling pattern. He checked the ventilator settings, confirming everything was untouched, then stepped back. Phoebe waited anxiously in the hallway when he emerged. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's safe," he assured her gently, "and I'm going to make sure she stays that way." He also added, with a quiet warmth, "And Phoebe, I think Lydia might be starting to respond to voices, yours included." The girl's eyes widened with cautious hope, and for the first time that day, her tiny shoulders eased. Lydia's return to consciousness began as a flicker, an indistinct sensation rising through layers of darkness that had held her for weeks. Sound came first, muffled and warped, like voices underwater. Then a distant pressure in her limbs, a dull ache behind her eyes, a faint awareness of air filling her lungs with mechanical rhythm. Her world was a fogged window, blurred and wavering, but something inside her pushed upward, searching for light. When her eyelids finally fluttered open, the room swam before settling into shapes and soft colors. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw a small, round face hovering above her, wide eyes, trembling lips, and a gasp of pure relief. "Lydia?" Phoebe whispered, hands flying to her mouth. "You're awake. You're really awake." Lydia tried to speak, but her throat felt raw, her tongue thick. Only a faint breath escaped, but Phoebe didn't seem to mind. She leaned closer, nearly climbing onto the bed in her excitement. "I knew you could hear me," she whispered. "I talk to you every day. I told you stories, and sometimes I thought you moved. Once your finger twitched. I saw it." Lydia blinked slowly, memories swirling like smoke. Shadows of voices, soft ones and harsh ones, drifting through her coma. She struggled to focus, gripping onto Phoebe's presence like an anchor in a storm. The child squeezed her hand gently, as if afraid she might disappear again. "I need to tell you something," Phoebe whispered, her small voice shrinking into fear. "I didn't want to, but I have to." Lydia's breathing changed, a subtle hitch the monitors captured instantly. She couldn't speak, but her eyes pleaded for the girl to continue. Phoebe leaned closer, her lashes trembling. "I heard your husband," she said, "when nobody was here. He came in, and he thought you were alone. He said he wished you would die." Lydia's heart lurched. A cold shock rippled down her spine, her pulse stuttering against the monitor's steady rhythm. Images flashed in her mind, nightmarish fragments she had dismissed as hallucinations. A man's voice dripping with resentment, words sharp as claws, a shadow leaning over her, whispering things she couldn't escape from even in unconsciousness. She had thought those sounds were dreams, the cruel tricks of a brain fighting its way through the dark. But they weren't dreams. They were real. Every terrible word she'd half heard, every shiver of dread she couldn't place, they had been him. Connor. Her husband. Phoebe clutched her hand tighter, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't want to scare you, but I couldn't let him hurt you." Lydia stared at the ceiling, vision blurring again, not from fog, but from heartbreak. Fear settled in her chest, heavy and suffocating. Her body was weak, but her mind was suddenly, painfully awake, and the truth was more devastating than the coma ever was. Phoebe hesitated only a moment before slipping off the bed and darting toward the hallway. Lydia tried to call out, but her throat was too raw, her muscles too weak. She could only watch, fear and confusion twisting inside her as the child vanished through the doorway. A few seconds passed, long enough for panic to rise, before Phoebe returned, clutching the worn brown teddy bear she carried everywhere. Her cheeks were flushed, breath shaky, but her eyes carried a solemn determination far too heavy for someone her age. She climbed carefully onto the chair beside Lydia's bed and held the bear in her lap, fingers trembling as she found the tiny plastic button on its chest. "I recorded it," she whispered. "I didn't mean to, not at first, but I pressed the button because I was scared, and it got everything." Lydia's heart hammered weakly against her ribs. She didn't want to hear it. She needed to hear it. Every instinct warred inside her as Phoebe lifted the bear closer to her face. "I'm sorry," Phoebe whispered, voice cracking. "But you have to know." Her thumb pressed the button. Static crackled for a second, then Connor's voice filled the room, raw, venomous, unfiltered. "You're a damn burden." The words lashed through the air like a blade. Lydia's breath hitched, her pulse spiking as the monitors beeped in protest. "You lie here, burning through money like it's nothing." Phoebe flinched at the remembered anger, but she didn't stop the playback. "You couldn't just go quietly, could you? No, you had to drag this out." Another pause, then the worst of it delivered in a cold, seething whisper. "It would be better for everyone if you just die. Your parents. And me. Especially me." The room went completely still. Helen had stepped inside sometime during the recording, drawn by the sound of voices. When the words hit her, she covered her mouth and staggered back against the wall. A muffled sob broke through her fingers. Walter followed a moment later, freezing mid-step as the final sentence echoed through the room. His face darkened, not with explosive rage, but with something far more controlled, a slow, simmering fury that tightened every muscle in his jaw. "That man," he managed, voice low and trembling, "stood here, saying that over my daughter's body?" Phoebe stopped the recording, hugging the bear to her chest. Lydia couldn't look away from the ceiling. Tears slid silently down her temples, wetting the pillow beneath her. They weren't from physical pain. They came from somewhere deeper, somewhere raw and newly opened. She had survived a coma, survived the cold shadows of unconscious terror, only to awaken into a betrayal she had never imagined. Her husband wanted her gone, wanted her dead, and now everyone knew it. Helen moved to her bedside, taking Lydia's limp hand in both of hers. Walter stood on the other side, silent but solid, his presence a shield of unspoken support. Lydia's lips trembled as another tear slipped free. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound her body had endured. There was no more doubt, no more pretending, no more benefit of the doubt. The truth lay exposed in the soft, mechanical beeps of the ICU room, in Phoebe's trembling hands, in the devastated silence of her parents. Connor's cruelty wasn't a nightmare. It was real, and it had been recorded. Dr. Lawson wasted no time once he heard the recording. He escorted Lydia's parents to her bedside, ensured she was stable, then stepped into the hallway with a look that every seasoned nurse immediately recognized. Controlled urgency. Within minutes, he was speaking with hospital security, explaining the situation with measured professionalism and an undercurrent of unmistakable alarm. The audio evidence, Phoebe's eyewitness account, Connor's growing hostility, the unexplained moments he lingered around Lydia's machines. Everything formed a pattern he could no longer ignore. Security contacted Boston police while Dr. Lawson provided a detailed report. The officers agreed the matter warranted immediate action. Together, they developed a plan. Connor would be lured back to the hospital under the pretense of a sudden medical crisis. He'd arrived thinking Lydia had taken a turn for the worse, perhaps even that she was close to the moment he'd been waiting for. Instead, he would walk directly into a controlled confrontation. A nurse placed the call. "Mr. Carter, we need you to come in right away. Your wife's condition has changed." Her voice carried the right amount of tension, just enough to suggest urgency without suspicion. Connor arrived 15 minutes later, irritation already wearing through his rehearsed expression of concern. He strode into the ICU area demanding, "What happened now?" as though the entire staff were inconveniencing him personally. A nurse intercepted him. "Dr. Lawson needs to speak with you first. He's in his office." Connor grunted, muttering something under his breath, and followed her down the hall. The small office was quiet, blinds half closed against the afternoon sun. Dr. Lawson stood behind his desk, hands clasped calmly, expression unreadable. "Have a seat, Mr. Carter," he said. Connor didn't. "Can we hurry this up? I was told there was a change in Lydia's condition." "There has been a development," Dr. Lawson replied, keeping his voice steady, "but not the kind you're expecting." Connor frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Dr. Lawson tapped the teddy bear on his desk, the same one Phoebe had handed him moments earlier. "We need to talk about what you said in your wife's room yesterday. It was recorded." The color drained from Connor's face. "Recorded? What are you talking about?" "Your exact words," Benjamin said, "are on the device. The police have heard them." Connor's composure cracked instantly. "This is ridiculous. It's a misunderstanding. That kid, she must have messed with it or—" "Phoebe didn't fabricate anything," Dr. Lawson said sharply, "and you were unaware she was present, so her testimony is uncontaminated. Your intent was clear and documented." Connor's breathing quickened. His eyes darted toward the door as if calculating an escape route. "You don't understand. I was upset. I didn't mean this is being blown out of proportion." Before he could gather another excuse, the office door opened. 2 uniformed Boston police officers stepped inside. "Connor Carter," one said, "you're under arrest for attempted harm, abuse of a vulnerable adult, and endangerment within a medical facility." Connor staggered back. Wait, you can't do this. You don't have proof. This is all—" "We have the recording," the officer replied, "and the witness report. Put your hands behind your back." Dr. Lawson watched silently as Connor was handcuffed, his protests growing desperate and incoherent. Security waited just outside, prepared to escort the officers through the hospital's restricted areas. Down the hall, Lydia's parents stood at her door. They saw everything. Helen covered her mouth as Connor was led past, her eyes shining with grief and disbelief. Walter's expression remained hard, carved with restrained fury, but a faint tremor in his hand betrayed how deeply the moment cracked him. Lydia, awake enough to understand but too weak to sit up, watched from her bed as her husband was marched out of the ICU. Her chest tightened, not from pain but from a kind of relief that hurt in its own way. The truth was devastating, but now it was undeniable. And the man who stood over her, wishing for her death, would no longer be the one standing outside her door. For the first time since opening her eyes, Lydia breathed a little easier. Lydia's recovery unfolded slowly, the healing process measured not just in medical milestones, but in moments of renewed clarity, trust, and unexpected companionship. Under Dr. Lawson's careful supervision, her strength returned day by day. Her muscles relearned movement. Her voice, at first only a whisper, grew steadier. But what mattered most was that she was no longer alone. Not in fear, not in confusion, and not in the fragile steps that followed awakening from a month-long coma. Phoebe was there through it all. The little girl visited every day after her physical therapy, slipping into Lydia's room with a smile that warmed even the dullest hospital afternoon. She brought hand-drawn pictures, tiny folded notes, and stories about the nurses, the weather, and the therapy dog she hoped would visit again soon. Lydia found herself looking forward to those moments more than any medical update. In Phoebe's presence, the heaviness in her chest eased. The girl's bright presence, her trembling courage, her unwavering loyalty, they became Lydia's emotional anchor in the uncertain weeks of recovery, and Phoebe's trust in Lydia was total. When she hugged her goodbye each evening, she whispered promises. "I'll come back tomorrow. I'll sit with you during therapy. I won't let you feel alone again." Those words mattered more than she knew. As Lydia grew stronger, Dr. Lawson remained a constant support. Not just her physician, but a steady presence who treated her with patience and quiet respect. He checked her progress meticulously, advocated for her safety, and helped her navigate the emotional aftermath of betrayal. He was gentle with his explanations, attentive in his care, and patient even when fear or exhaustion clouded her thoughts. And he cared deeply for Phoebe, too. It was during one of their shared afternoons, Lydia sketching weak circles on a therapy pad while Phoebe colored beside her, that Lydia realized something she had been circling for days. She watched Phoebe's thin shoulders, her careful focus, the way she looked up every few seconds to make sure Lydia was still there. A child so fiercely loyal, so accustomed to hospitals, so accustomed to being alone. Lydia wanted to change that. She asked Dr. Lawson about Phoebe's situation. He explained gently, Phoebe had no stable family. Her long medical history had made placement difficult. She was under the care of Massachusetts DCF but had no confirmed adoptive home. That night, Lydia barely slept. A week later, when she gathered enough strength to sit upright without help, she made her decision. I want to adopt her, she told Dr. Lawson. Her voice shook, not from weakness, but from certainty. I want her to have a home, a real one. Benjamin's eyes softened, not just in support, but in something deeper. I think she would thrive with you, he said quietly, and I'll help in any way I can. The process began. Evaluations, forms, home assessments once Lydia was discharged. It was lengthy and meticulous, but Lydia stayed determined. Phoebe needed stability. She needed love, and Lydia realized she did too. Over the next year, the three of them intertwined their lives naturally. Lydia and Phoebe grew into a bond that was both motherly and profound. Dr. Lawson remained close, first as a guardian figure, then as a friend, and eventually as something more. Their affection grew quietly, built on shared responsibility, mutual respect, and the gentle way they each cared for Phoebe. By the time the adoption finalized, Phoebe clung to Lydia so tightly it brought tears to every caseworker's eyes. They moved into Lydia's restored Cambridge home, now a place of laughter instead of fear. A year later, Lydia and Dr. Lawson married in a small ceremony overlooking the Charles River. 2 years after that, they welcomed a son, Evan, a boy with Benjamin's calm eyes and Phoebe's stubborn spark. Their family was unconventional, built from pain, trust, and second chances. But it was theirs, whole, healing, strong. And in Phoebe's new bedroom, on a neatly made bed covered in quilts Lydia had chosen with care, sat the old teddy bear. Its worn fur and tiny recorder had captured the words that saved Lydia's life and reshaped all their futures. A quiet testament to the moment a child's courage changed everything and created a family none of them had ever expected.